Hi everyone. I think we can begin today's class. I have already returned to you the grades for the quiz, so we will have a brief discussion on that. Uh, in particular, do you have any queries? I mean, I will be discussing particularly the part C of it.
Sir,
Have you gone through it? Yeah, yeah.
yeah, before you discuss part three of that, can I
Mhm.
ask something?
Yeah, 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 please.
So, I was actually confused
Mm.
when to apply palm distribution idea.
Mm-hmm.
Does part three is an example of where to apply palm distribution, or am I confusing it with something?
Not really, not really. So, if you remember, for palm probabilities and palm distribution, we had necessarily the case that the condition on the event, or we are interested in the event that there is a point located at a distance, right? So, I'll give you an example. When will you use palm distribution? Okay. So, suppose there is a point process, right? So, suppose this point process is given by this x's, right? And what you're interested in is the nearest neighbor distribution. Okay, so what is the nearest neighbor distribution? It's the distribution of one of these x's from one of the neighboring x's. Okay, until now in our class we have looked at in detail the nearest point or nearest let's say the closest point from the origin, right? Which means that if you select, if you are thinking about this point, this red axis to be a homogeneous point process, if you select any random point at this entire plane, which means that it's not necessarily a point of the point process, it's just a point in the plane, let's call it this guy. And let us, since due to homogeneity we can shift our origin there, we have been trying to derive let's say distance distributions to the nearest point from that origin, right, which we have selected. But suppose now instead we are interested in the nearest neighbor distribution, which means that now our point of observation is one of such points. Okay, now in case of Poisson point process, nothing changes because of Slivniak's theorem, which means that whether you add a point here or you don't add a point here, it hardly makes a difference, and it's due to the theorem which we saw in the last class. But for general point processes which do not necessarily obey this Slivniak's theorem, for that now you have to condition on this probability that there is a point located at uh, this origin, right? So here you would be using the palm distribution, which means now conditioned on the event that there is a point located here, what is the distance distribution to the closest point from the origin, given that there is a point at the origin. Okay, so these two different evaluations or two different distributions, number one being the nearest point from the origin, and the second one being the nearest point from the origin, given that there is a point belonging to the origin, might not necessarily have the same distribution, right? Um, in case of Poisson point processes, they turn out to be the same because of this Leibniz theorem. So you see why, what is the difference of having this notion of palm probability in place. In
Yes.
Yeah, in the example, I mean, in the third question of your quiz, there was no conditional event which says whether there is a point located at a particular location. Okay, I'll come to what conditional event the third part of the question had. Okay, we will have a brief discussion on that, and I think it will give you a bit more clarity to what it was. Okay, so we'll start with that. I'll give you a couple of more examples of this Poisson point process, especially a single, let's say, point process, right? Not phi one and phi two. I hope you are trying yourselves the examples and the homeworks that I am giving you through the class, right? So if not, I mean, it is best for you to just try it out, and if you are not able to work on it, just let me know. We can have a meeting. By the way, I'm going to set up a weekly office hours in case you have an additional doubt about some numerical examples, or if you want to discuss some additional let's say exercises. So does Friday work for you guys, or or do you think that I should rather set up a doodle poll to get the common time? Okay, let me do the later one. I'll send you guys the doodle link and you just fill it up, and we will have a weekly office hours to discuss all these things. Okay. In the quiz, there was this question that we have a point process which is distributed throughout the R2 plane. Remember that I think one or two of you have made this mistake of assuming that this point process is, let's say, bounded to A to B, but it's not true. Okay, so the point process is actually distributed throughout the entire plane, or defined, or the domain of the point process is in the entire R2 plane. What we are focusing on, or what we are observing, is this annular region, or let's say the ring, which has, let's say, the nearest, which is defined by distances A and distance B, and we are interested in the points which lie between these two circles, right? The first part was fairly easy. I think the first part was to give an expression for the average number of points that lie inside of this annular region. For the sake of ease, let's call that annular region A, right? It's the ball with origin as the center and B as the radius, minus the set which is defined by the ball of origin as the center and A as the radius, right? You understand this? This is the outer circle minus the inner circle. That's the area we are interested in, and which we will be calling this set A, right? Let the area of set A, right, be denoted by mod of A, which is nothing but pi B square minus pi A square. So it's just a notation which we can use, right? And the first part, most of you have done it correctly. I think almost all of you have done it correctly, which is the average number of points lying inside of this annular region is simply lambda times mod of A, right? Which is lambda times pi times B square minus A square. If you have used the formula directly, I have given you marks. If you have tried to derive it, that's also fine. But you must always remember where it is coming from, right? Why? So, for example, if we are dealing with a Poisson random variable, let's say x is a Poisson random variable, which means probability that x equal to, let's say, Poisson with intensity lambda or parameter lambda, which means that the probability that x takes on values n is given by e to the minus lambda, lambda to the n by n factorial, right? And how would you find out the mean value of x? The mean value of x is simply all the values of n multiplied by the probability that it is indeed n, right? So it becomes n times the PDF that it is n, right? Where n can be from 0 to infinite. Now, if you evaluate this, it takes a bit of trick to evaluate this, but it's fairly straightforward. You would find out that this is indeed lambda, right? So that's why, as an example or as a homework, try to find out what would be the second moment of x. Okay, try to find this out. Okay, let me give this as a homework. Okay, never mind. So we know that if there is, it's a Poisson point process, the probability that there are n points inside of this annular region, so number of points inside A equal to n, is simply e to the minus lambda A, right? Lambda A to the n by n factorial, right? And similarly, if you find out the expected value of this number of points inside of A, you would find that it is lambda times A, right? Of course, this is the mean value, but this is how it comes. I mean, this is how it is evaluated. Okay. The second part of the question follows straightforward from this one, where you just have to find out the probability that the number of points is indeed 0, right? So that's also something we have discussed in class. It's simply the void probability, and I keep on using this term called void probability, right? Informally, it simply means the probability that the number of points inside some set A, with a number of points inside some set A equal to 0. Right? So that's what you had to find in the second part of the question. And if you simply substitute n equal to 0 in the in the PDF, you directly get the probability as e to the minus lambda area of A. Okay. These two questions, I think almost all of you have gotten it correctly. Okay. The issue came with the third one, where we are supposed to find out the nearest the distance distribution to the nearest point from the origin which belongs to this set A, right? Which means in this example probably it would be this guy, right? So these are the points which are present inside this set A. So we have to find out the distance distributions of this random variable which dictates the distance to the nearest point in the set A. Okay, if I try to write such a distance, so let's the part C. So d1 is the distance to the nearest point in A from the origin. Yeah. So if I try to find out, or if I try to write the PDF of distance d1, right, defined for some x. So what would be its value when x is less than A? Can anyone tell me?
0.
Right. And what about the case when x is larger than B?
Also 0.
Right. So it's defined only when x is, again, I would like you to develop this habit of writing these expressions of probability in a very rigorous and concrete mathematical terms, right? When we say PDF, just do not write an expression, write the domain of it as well. And I will come to this discussion that why we did not discuss about this domain while we had found out the general case. That is what would in the previous class, we had derived the distance distribution to the nearest point from the origin in the general case when we were observing the entire R2 plane, and we'll come to that point. Okay. But never mind, when x is less than B and greater than A, it's something that we have to find out. Okay. So let's consider the event E. So event E is the number of points inside A is 0. Okay. So in case the number of points inside A is 0, this PDF is not defined, right? Because if there is no point inside of A, there is no PDF of the nearest point to from the origin to A, right? But we know how to describe this event E. We have just found out in the second part of this question. So given that there is at least one point in A, right? So the probability that there are at least one point in A, right? This is simply 1 minus the event E, the probability of event E, right? So which is simply 1 minus e to the minus lambda A. Yeah. Or let's call this event E bar, right? Which is 1 minus the probability that there are no points in A. So given that at least one point is in A, right, you have to find out the distance distribution to the nearest point. So let's, for that matter, let's again go to the same description which we had, or the same methodology which we have used to derive, which means that let that nearest point which we are finding, to the distribution of which we are trying to find out, is located at a distance of x, right? Which means the distance of this guy from the center is x. Okay. So what does it mean when we say that this is the nearest point from the center? It means that there are no other points, right, within a distance of x in the domain which we are observing in. I mean, of course, there can be points here, but we are not bothered about those. They will not come into the calculation of the nearest point inside of this set A, because these do not belong to the set A. So what does this mean? It means that the probability that D1, right, is some less than x, which we have to find out. So this is the CDF of D1. It is again 1 minus the probability that D1 is greater than x. It means 1 minus the probability that the number of points inside the ball of radius x minus the ball of radius a is actually 0. Yeah. Again, remember that there is a issue here. So remember that whatever we are calculating is conditioned that there is at least one point in A. So we are indeed finding out something like this. Is the development until this point clear? So what we are finding out is the probability that there are no points inside of this new region that we have created, which is this guy, and it is given by this annular region of 0 to x minus 0 to a. Yeah, given that there is at least one point located inside of this 0 to b, sorry, a to b. Yeah. Now from here on, the probability is straightforward. It's similar to what you have already done. The probability that no points inside of a certain region is simply e to the power minus lambda times pi x square minus a square. Yes. Now f of d1 x given e1, sorry, x given e bar, if we differentiate it with respect to x, we get the PDF of d1 given some event e, or let's try to write it like this. So a d1 which is valid when e bar is true, the PDF of that point is given by the differentiation of this guy, which is 2 pi lambda x e to the minus lambda pi x square minus a square. Now if we are trying to find out the PDF of d1 of x given e is true, sorry, e bar is true, we simply have to find out, or okay, let me be consistent with these expressions. So we are trying to find out the PDF of d1 of x such that there is one point that belongs to that that set a to b, because it is defined only when e bar is true. It is simply the conditional probability of x, or conditional distribution of x given e bar multiplied by the probability of e bar. Okay, so what does this become? This becomes 2 pi lambda x e to the minus lambda x square minus a square multiplied by the probability, which is 1 minus e to the power minus lambda b square minus a square. Okay, so this is the stuff which goes inside here. So let's call this like this. Okay, any questions? Yes, no? So remember when we were discussing about the nearest neighbor, or the distribution to the nearest point from the origin, and we were considering all the R2 plane, we did not really bother about this term. Why? Because if you see that as b tends to infinite, the probability that e bar, the probability of the event e bar, remember what is e bar? E bar is the probability that there is at least one point inside the annulus. Yes. So when b tends to infinity, probability of E bar tends to 1, which means for a Poisson point process in the entire R2 plane, it can never happen that there are no points, regardless of whatever lambda is. Okay, unless lambda is 0, of course. I mean, for non-zero lambda, this means for non-zero lambda, there exists at least one point in R2 for a PPP. Okay, and since this occurred with a probability of 1 for a general Poisson point process, our nearest neighbor distribution in that case was A equal to 0 and B equal to 1 simply becomes, so when A equal to 0 and B equal to not 1, B equal to infinite, we have f of d1 x defined as whatever you had derived earlier. So this is true for x greater than equal to 0. Any questions up until this point? Concerns? No? Because if not, we can discuss a similar, let's say, exercise which takes both of these things into account. One, the nearest neighbor distribution. The second, evaluation of some kind of mean which uses such a distribution. So these are the two skills that were tested in the previous quiz. We can look at another example. So let's call it example. I don't know if it was maybe 10. Okay. So the question is, you have to find out the mean. So what is the mean distance between 2 points, not 2 points, what is the mean distance between nearest points of a Poisson point process? Okay, so Poisson point process is defined as phi with an intensity lambda. Okay, what does this mean? It means that suppose you have a Poisson point process with a realization something like this, you are supposed to go to each of these point, yeah, find out which is its nearest neighbor, right? So let's go to this guy. If we go to this guy, probably its nearest neighbor is this. So let's call it d1. Remember that for this guy itself, maybe it's not the same as d1, maybe this guy is its nearest neighbor. So this is the other thing. So what we have to find out is to go to each point, identify their nearest neighbor, and call that a random variable d1 now. What we have to find out is the expected value of d1. Is the question clear? Yes, no?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So in terms of cellular network dimensioning, what it tells the operator is what is the mean distance. Suppose these guys are base stations in your network. What is the average distance between the cell sites, which means the location of the base stations. If you think about a base station and its nearest neighbor base station to be at a distance of d1, you are interested to find out what is the expected value of this d1. Okay. As an initial starting point, I'll tell you that thanks to this Slivniak's theorem, we can assume, I mean, the question which Soradip was asking a while ago, thanks to this Slivniak's theorem, we can assume or we can go to a point of this point process and calculate the nearest neighbor distances from the origin by considering that point to be located at the origin, and due to this theorem, none of the statistical measures of the rest of the process changes, which means, in short, all of this elaborate discussion, in short, it means that the nearest neighbor distribution is still given by this guy, even whether we consider it from the origin or whether we are considering from the perspective of one of the points of the point process or not. they are both equal. That's what the theorem states. Okay, so what we are trying to find out is the expected value of d1 when the PDF of d1 is given by 2 pi lambda x e to the minus pi lambda x square. Okay, so have a habit of writing this expression, because again we will be using it time and again throughout this course. Okay, so I'll take a pause of a couple of minutes here. So it's 4:24. I'll take a pause until 4:30. So I hope you have all your notebooks open with you. I would ask you to just evaluate this expected value of d1. Okay, so one of you have it. You have 1 by square root of lambda. Are you sure? Can you check if you missed some constant or no? So basically what you have to do is integral of x f d1 x dx. Right. Saradip, you are very close. I think there is just one term missing probably. If you want to check up your solution, which you have done in your notebook, you can just fire up Wolfram Alpha and do the integration. It's a very simple one, right? Right. So we have it. I hope most of you have been able to evaluate it. It's simply the integration. So it's 1 by 2 square root of lambda, right? So I would like you to plot it as a function of lambda, and you would see that it would give you a graph which the cellular network operators often use to dimension the network, which means that if you tell them that you have a budget of probably 10 base stations, which means that they have to deploy within a certain area 10 base stations, that gives you automatically what the distance, what the density of the base stations would be. So suppose your area is 1 kilometer square, and you have, if you have 10 base stations, your intensity lambda would be 10 divided by 1e6, which will give you 1e minus 5, right? This gives you one base station per let's say 10,000 square meters, right? Once you have this value of lambda, which is given in terms of per meter, right, you would automatically have the average distance between two neighboring base stations. That is a good way to approximate how your cellular system would perform, which means that I mean, when you are actually trying to find out, or when you are trying to dimension a network, or when you are trying to characterize the performance of a user that a user would have in such a network, you have to take care of the cell center users, which are located very close to the base stations and accordingly might have a very good connection. You have to also cater to cell edge users, which are located towards the far outer boundaries of the base stations. So we would be differentiating later on in our course. It's not important for this moment, but let me just write them. Cell center users, which are located very close to the base station, and cell edge users, which are located near the cell boundaries. As an example, if these are your location of the base stations, you would have something like this, which governs the distance between, let's say, which governs the coverage area of individual base stations, right? So the users which are located very near to their base stations would have a very good coverage. The users which are located, let's say, near the cell boundaries would have very bad coverage, because not only their signal is less powerful, but they are also experiencing a larger or stronger interference signal as compared to the cell center users, right? So as a result, it's important to know how far your extent of the cell boundary goes, and this parameter gives you a back of the envelope calculation to estimate that if you have a certain amount of base stations per unit area deployed, what would be your average cell boundary. Okay, any questions about this particular example? Yes, no, no? Okay, if none, we can directly move on to our main topic for the day, which is to analyze single tier networks. Okay, so we have to find out, or we have to do the coverage analysis. We will talk about what the coverage analysis means. Coverage analysis of single tier cellular networks. Okay. So a couple of assumptions before we go ahead. We would assume that all the base stations in the network are distributed according to a Poisson point process. After today's class, I will upload a paper which is not very new. It is more than 10 years old now, which says that dense networks behave, or asymptotically behave, as if they were Poissonian. Okay, this is the title of the paper, which says that okay, we are using this Poisson point process because it has these elegant mathematical expressions, and it allows us to draw some conclusions and inferences from this type of modeling. But that is not the only point behind it. One of the other major points is that if we are considering or if we are dealing with very dense cellular networks, what does it mean by dense? It means a lot of base stations deployed within a certain area, right? Which will be true in the case of small cells, which are going to be deployed all around us. Some of them already have been, right? But if we are dealing with such networks which are densely deployed asymptotically, it means as the density goes towards infinite, it behave as if the location of the base stations were Poisson distributed, right? So classically, when the cellular operators were deploying the macro base stations, a lot of things go go behind deploying macro base stations, right? Once you have to for starters, you have to identify a cell site. You have to take a loan on this or take a lease of this area of the land. You have to put on a tower, right? On top of the tower, each of these operators will put up their own antennas, and accordingly it's a big thing, right? As a result, when these big towers were being deployed, it was fairly regular, which means in your, I mean, some of you might have already uh, studied this in your let's say telecom graduate courses, that the initial deployment of the base stations assumed that there was a hexagonal nature of deployment. It only not only enabled the base stations to be quite far apart from each other, but also it enabled something called frequency reuse, which means you ensure that your neighboring base stations are operating in a different frequency so that they do not interfere with the users which you are serving. Nevertheless, this became a very thing of the past, as more and more small cells were getting deployed on top of roofs, along the roads. I mean, if you can just search small cells in your Chrome or in your browser, you would find out how they look like. Okay, so once they were started to get deployed, the deployment scenario from the top looked very irregular. Okay, this irregularity, when we take it to the extreme, which means that there is a lot of base stations being deployed in an irregular manner, in an ad hoc manner, the results, the simulation results, which means your on-field experimentations which you do, match very closely with a theoretical model where the base station locations are assumed to be a Poisson point process. Now, is this argument clear for everyone, or is there any concern about it? Right, so if there is none, we move towards this coverage analysis, and keeping this in mind that we are using this Poisson point process not only because of its theoretical elegance, but also it makes practical relevance because it's very close to our experiments. Okay, so what do we have with us? We have a base stations deployed as Poisson point process phi with intensity lambda, which means every meter, or on an average every square meter there is lambda. Oh, by the way, I think I have, yeah, the unit of lambda is actually unit area. Okay, of course, if you are deploying the base stations on a one-dimensional line, which we will come across in a later part of our course when we will be deploying base stations along the roads, that makes a one-dimensional deployment, that would be per unit length. For the moment, it's per unit area. Okay, so we have a base station process which is defined as a Poisson point process, or the locations of these base stations is governed by a Poisson point process with intensity lambda. We will have also users. For this calculation, we will not be bothered about how the users are located, but they also follow some kind of point process. May not be, maybe Poisson point process, may not be Poisson point process. But for our ease, let us assume them to be Poisson point process with another, I mean, it's defined as another Poisson point process phi of u with intensity lambda u, which means there on an average there are lambda u number of users per square meter, right? I mean, generally we would have lambda u to be, I mean, somewhat greater than lambda, right? But for the moment we will make no such assumption. Okay. What we will be introducing is the concept of a typical user. So a typical user is a user which is randomly selected from the distribution of users. So it is a user selected randomly from the distribution of users. Okay, so what does this mean? It means that suppose you have in one realization 10 users, you would sample one of them uniformly in case of a Poisson point process, and you will probably select user number 4. Okay. And you are trying to observe what are the performance, or what are this coverage performance of that user number 4. Probably in the second realization of this entire network, you have gotten probably 20 users. You randomly select another user from this set of 20 users. Probably you get user number 12 or something, and you do the calculation of this matrix from the perspective of this user number 12. Now if you keep on continuing this process throughout the entire infinite realizations of this Poisson point process, or this set of Poisson point processes, the users which you are getting at each sampling or each realization, they constitute what is called the typical user. Okay, is this notion clear? So typical user is not really one, let's say it's not the identity of one of the users. It's loosely speaking, it is the average user, but it doesn't mean that it is located at an average location, or it is one of the, I mean, it has nothing to do with the mean. It is randomly selected with some probability distribution of the users. In case of Poisson point processes, it's uniformly selected, uniformly randomly selected, and we will be characterizing the network from the perspective of the performance of this typical user. Okay, what does that mean? It means that across all the realizations, if we evaluate that the typical user has let's say 1 Gbps data rate, or let's say the probability that the rate of the typical user is greater than 1 Gbps is, let's say, 0.5. It means two things, and two very key things. The metric of a typical user not only represents the statistical properties of individual users, but ergodically, because it's an ergodic process in the end, ergodically, it also defines the performance metric of the entire network. Okay. For example, what does this mean? The probability that the typical user has a rate greater than 1 Gbps to be equal to 0.5. It means that in one realization, in across all realizations, if you go to individual users, right, the individual user has a 50% chance of getting a rate which is greater than 1 Gbps. It also means that if you are considering one single realization, 50% of the users in the network that are getting realized have a rate greater than 1 Gbps ergodically. Is this clear? Because this is an important part to consider. If it's not clear, I can repeat. Yeah.
So what do we mean by ergodically?
So what do you mean by an ergodic process? Can anyone tell us?
So the mean across all realizations is the same.
Sorry?
Mean across all realizations is the same.
Mean across all realization is the same. It's one part of it, but it's not complete yet, right?
Sir, it means like property of a whole can be deduced by a single unit.
Yes, that's right. So property of the whole across all realizations, which Swaradip was mentioning, can be deduced by observing one of the single entities of a process. So a random process in general is said to be ergodic. I mean, if you consider that example in the first class where we defined a stochastic process in terms of some temporal function, right? So a random process similar to that is said to be ergodic if all the time averages of that process they behave similar to the ensemble averages, which means expectation of one of these random variables is also the expectation of this random function xt. Okay, so I'll tell you in this case what it means, and I think it will be more clear what it means. Okay, so an ergodic process in this sense, or ergodic notion of this equivalence in this context, what it means is that suppose you have 5 realizations of the network. Suppose you have one realization which is like this, another realization which is like this, or let's say 3 realizations, something like this. Okay, it doesn't necessarily have to be the same number of points across all things. Okay, what it means is that suppose you are one of such users. Of course, the identity of the user is not carried across all realizations. It's an independent let's say example of the process itself. But if we are considering one of these users and you go to one of these cities which has a certain distribution of base stations given by these plus signs, right? And you go to the second city where you have these plus signs as the base stations, and you go to a third city which has these plus signs as this thing, right? So let's call you this blue X. Okay, so in the first city you are interested in whether I am getting a rate 1 Gbps here or not. So for this case it will be a yes no answer. Yes, you go to a second city and you station yourself at a certain location, and you are again asking yourself the same question, that whether I am getting this rate of 1 Gbps or not. Okay, remember, across all these realizations, the intensity or the plus point process is governed by the same intensity. This point process is the point process of the base stations, is always has the same lambda. Okay, it's the same lambda in the first example, it's the same lambda in the second example, it's the same lambda in the third example. Okay, now you are this blue user and you are asking this question at each, let's say, realization of these plus signs across different cities. You are asking this question whether my rate is greater than 1 Gbps or not. It will be a yes no question here, it will be a yes no question here, it will be a yes no question here, right? So suppose here you get a yes, here you get a no, here you get again a yes. You will say, from your perspective, across the all possible realizations of this Poisson point process plus signs, or the Poisson point process representing the base stations, I have given you 3 realizations, but imagine or try to imagine infinite such realizations. Okay, so from your perspective, 30% of the times you are getting a no, or 30, let's say 66% of the times you get a yes, which means 66% of the times you are perceiving a rate which is greater than 1 Gbps, right? So this is what we have calculated here, right? Ergodically, when I say ergodically, it means for a given realization, 66% of the red guys will have a rate greater than 1 Gbps. If you yourself are having this rate greater than 1 Gbps 66% of the times across all realizations. Is this clear, or does it clarify this term ergodically?
Yes, sir.
Okay, perfect. Any other questions from anyone? So this blue guy in our context will be called the typical user, right? Whatever we will be doing is characterizing the performance of this network from the perspective of this typical user, which is this blue cross. But you have to realize, or you have to always keep in mind, that it is not the performance of a single user. It represents somehow the average performance across the network of all the users. Okay, without loss of generality, or we log, I will be writing this term a lot, which means without loss of generality, let us assume that the typical user is located at the origin. Okay, so this blue guy is located at the origin, and what we are interested in is its performance in terms of with respect to different realizations of the Poisson point process that represent the base stations. Okay, now when I say we are interested in its performance, we have to define a metric which governs whether the performance is good or bad. In the previous let's say small example, that metric was this rate of the typical user. To go to the rate, first what we would be defining is called the SINR. I had already defined it in the last class, which is the signal to interference and or plus noise ratio. In many texts, of stochastic geometry, you would find out that it is written as SNIR, which is signal to noise and interference ratio, but it's basically the same thing, right? So what does it mean? It is my useful signal, which we will be calling signal, divided by noise and sum of all interfering signals. Yes. So let us assume, before even we go to describe what this SINR would be, we have to find out, or we have to at least define some strategy to calculate this useful signal. For example, for this blue guy, right, you have to find out one, or you have to at least define one strategy to select a base station from which you would be deriving those useful signals. For example, this could have been the base station which gives this blue user the service. It could equivalent be this guy or any other one, right? So one of the typical things that we would be assuming throughout this course is called RSSI association. It represents received signal strength indicator. It means nothing but associate with the base station which is giving you the highest received power. Okay. Now, if we for a moment do not worry about this fading and all, right? So, what would you be? With which base station do you think we should be associating with to get the highest received power?
So the nearest one.
Right. The nearest one should be giving you the highest received power. Why? Because we saw that the received power decreases as a function of the distance, right? So, whatever you are getting as the signal, or if I try to write this SINR, right, we would be having the transmit power. So, okay, this is another assumption. So, transmit power of all base stations is equal to P. The path loss exponent, let's call it alpha. Yeah. And there is Rayleigh fading, which we will come to a bit later. Okay. So we have this transmit power, some constants which take care of the antenna gain and let's say path loss at 1 meter and so on. So all of them I am keeping it as some k. We have distance, the first one to the minus alpha, multiplied by some fading, which dictates how your actual received power instantaneously fluctuates across the average received power. In this numerator, does anyone have any doubt about any of these terms? If it's not, I had already described this before, but if still there is a doubt, please feel free to stop me at any time. Okay. I hope all these four terms are clear. Can anyone quickly tell me what are the random quantities involved and which are the constant ones? Anyone?
D1 and H are random.
Right. D1 and H are random. K, P, and alpha are fixed. Okay. Now we have something called the noise power, and we will come to how this noise power depends on the bandwidth and so on. But for the moment, let us assume that noise is given by a constant called N0. Okay. And the sum across all the interference powers. So Di and Hi. Remember that when you have different base stations to a user, right, each of these links is experiencing an independent fast fading. So this guy is H1, this guy is H2, this guy is H3. So each of these received powers is fluctuating around its mean, modeled by an independent Hi. Okay, I hope this part is also clear, right? What we would be interested in is the probability that SINR is greater than gamma. Why is there a probability? Because not always it will be greater than gamma, because there are random quantities involved. Remember that the random quantities are not only in the numerator but also in the denominator. In the denominator they are di and hi's, right? Nevertheless, one thing missing from here is that all your interference signals are coming from the points of this point process except the x1. What is x1? X1 is the point representing the location of the nearest base station or the first base station. Is this subscript of the summation clear to everyone? Because this will become a very important, I mean, it will become a big deal as we go to calculate these steps. Okay, so if this is clear, then let us try to do the same calculation that we had done earlier. Remember that we have done our association, and this is an important point to note. We have done our association by assuming which base station gives us the highest average received power. What does it mean? It means that if you are this user given by this blue X, and if you have certain base stations given by this plus S, okay, of course on an average this guy will have the maximum value of P D1 to the minus alpha times K. Okay, this guy gives K P D2 to the minus alpha. However, remember that instantaneously it might happen that this plus gives you a higher received power than this plus. Why? Because of this fast fading. This guy has multiplied H2 with it, and this guy has multiplied H1 with it, which models the fluctuation of the instantaneous power across its mean, about its mean, right? So it might happen that sometimes this guy is instantaneously giving you a higher received power. However, you are not, according to this RSSI association, you are not associating based on the instantaneous power but the average received power. Okay, however, once you have done your association, which means you have started to receive services from this guy, yeah, your instantaneous performance, which means your instantaneous SINR, that is the SINR calculated at a certain instant of time, it is affected by this individual fading variables, right? So although our association is based on average received power, our performance is dictated by this instantaneous received power, and hence we are calculating this probability. However, remember that for the purpose of throughout most of the part of our course, you will be saying that you are associating with a base station which gives you the average highest received power. Is this development also clear? Okay, because otherwise if you are trying to associate based on instantaneous received power, it might happen that at time t1 you are having a useful base station which is this guy, but at time 2 you must necessarily have this guy as the useful base station in case it provides you a higher power. But users generally do not fluctuate their associations so quickly as the fast fading moves. The user generally settles down on a base station and receives services, how good or bad they may be, from that base station. Okay, I hope this development is also clear. Okay, if these 3-4 terms, or let's say ground rules, are clear, what we have to evaluate is the probability that K P D1 minus alpha H1 N0 plus summation of K P Di minus alpha Hi of all points except the first point is greater than some threshold gamma. Okay, this we will be calling the coverage probability of gamma. It means the typical user, so if coverage probability evaluates into, let's say, something like 0.7 or something, the typical user experiences that SINR with a probability 0.7, or 70% of the time the typical user experiences an SINR greater than gamma. Ergodically, 70% of the users in the network experiences an SINR greater than gamma. I hope this has been said enough number of times. Okay, following the development which we had done a couple of classes ago, the first step, since we are dealing with many of these random variables d1, h1, di, hi, I had explained how to go about these type of calculations of let's say one random variable to be greater than the other one, or let's say a ratio of certain random variables to be greater than some constant. You try to start with the easiest of random variable for which we have the expression for the CDF and all, right? So if you have h1 on this side, the stuff that goes into the numerator on the other side is kpdi minus alpha hi minus alpha by kpd1 minus alpha. Okay, so this step is simply an algebraic manipulation. Can you tell me what would be the next step? Can someone tell me what is the CCDF of h1? Anyone? What would be the next step?
The 1 minus ph1 less than
Mm-hmm.
ph1 less than that term is the CDF.
Right. So, do you remember for Rayleigh fading, what is the distribution of H1? I think we discussed in the third or the fourth class. So, for Rayleigh fading, the fading power is exponentially distributed. Do you remember this? Yes, no.
So 1 minus e to power minus
That's the CDF. And since we are calculating the CCDF, that is 1 minus what you were saying.
e to the power minus.
So, that's simply EXP of minus gamma n0. Remember, it's a Rayleigh fading with a exponential distribution with power 1. So that's what we have. Another assumption, I think I have not written it yet. Okay, so this is one assumption, this is another assumption, this is the third. The fourth one is Rayleigh fading with unit variance. So unit variance means the power has a mean of 1, which means we are dealing with an exponential random variable which has a mean of 1. So it simply becomes e to the power minus of whatever we are calculating rather than e to the minus mu of something, right? So this is simply sum of kpdi minus alpha hi minus alpha, no, hi. Yeah. So from now on, let us represent phi dash. So where phi dash is simply phi minus x1. So I belongs to all these points phi dash, right? Now, if we observe, we can separate it into, okay, of course, this step is not complete. Why is it not complete? Can someone point it out? Is this complete? Can we evaluate this step directly using this expression? Yes, no? Of course not, because there are many random variables still remaining inside. For example, D1, all DIs, all HIs. So you have to take an expectation with respect to these things. So this expectation is with respect to not only phi dash, but also D1. So D1 and phi dash together form phi. So let's call them phi. It is also with respect to all the HIs, right? So if we separate this and go to the next step, which means we have an expected value of exp of minus gamma n0 by kp d1 minus alpha, exp of minus the summation of across phi dash of k p di minus alpha of hi by kp d1 minus alpha. Okay, I will not proceed further, but make a couple of inferences at this point. Okay, step B follows from step A because exponential of the sum becomes the product of the exponentials. That part should be fairly clear. Okay, so we have divided the above expression into two parts. The first part, can someone point out what is the random variable involved in the first part?
DI.
So D1.
Right, so it's only D1, right? So the first part represents the impact on the SINR that happens only due to the noise and of course the location of your serving base station. The impact of the interference is together forming a part of this expression B. So in case you want to find out the performance of the network which is noise limited, which means your interference is so low that you would say that SINR is almost equal to SNR. Remember, SINR is signal by noise plus interference, right? So when interference is so low as compared to the noise, this becomes approximately equal to S by N. So if you want to calculate or if you want to evaluate the performance with respect to only the noise and not the interference, either because the interference is low or you have probably some mechanisms to tackle this interference, you need to only consider the first expression and take an expectation with respect to D1 and your job is finished. Okay. If I try to write this in a better way, we have an expectation. Remember here the expectation is with respect to phi and hi. So phi is nothing. Yeah.
I think for the B term there should be a gamma before the
Yes,
sign.
yes. I think like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are correct. Of course, this threshold with which we are comparing the SINR, it matters whether the interference is greater than that or not, or the noise is greater than that or not. Okay, yeah, of course. So for the second part, B, it depends, the expression B not only depends on the location of the first base station, but also it depends on the location of the other base stations and their individual fading random variables, which is HI. However, for the second term, you see that many terms disappear from the numerator and the denominator, right? For example, the K disappears, the P disappears because it's present at both the numerator and the denominator. Okay. So in case you are dealing with, so this is probably case 1. So in case you are dealing with something like case 2, where your SINR is almost equal to SIR, which means the interference is so large that it is dominating the noise, right? Which can happen in case of dense networks, which means all the interferers are so closely located that they are providing such a powerful interference signal that noise is a very minor problem as compared to that. So in case you are dealing with only interference limited networks, so this is called a noise limited network. This is called an interference limited network. In that case, you only have to evaluate expression B by taking an expectation over phi and HIs. Okay. In that case, very surprisingly, but if you think about it, not very counterintuitively, it's intuitively, it doesn't depend on the power of the transmission of the base stations. Okay. What it means is that if you are a user like this, suppose this is your serving base station and the serving base and this is your interfering base station. So this is your signal, this is your interference. In case of interferer or interference dominated networks or interference limited networks, if you increase this power by 2 times and if you increase this power by 2 times, your SINR remains the same, SIR remains the same, right? So it doesn't necessarily help you by increasing all the base stations power. Okay, it only helps in the case of noise limited networks. Okay, these conclusions should be fairly straightforward once you think about it like this. Okay, so we have to take an expectation with respect to D1 for both the terms A and B, right? The first term has nothing else except D1 going on. The second term, on the other hand, has an expectation with respect to HIs and also phi dash. Okay, So this is something like this. Minus gamma phi dash di minus alpha hi by d1 minus alpha. So what you will be doing in your evaluations is you will be taking an expectation with respect to hi's here and across all the base stations which are the interfering base stations here. What you will be what you will have with you in the end of all these processes is a term which only depends on d1. You multiply it with this first term which depends on d1 and take an expectation with respect to d1. Okay, so we will come to that part as well. So let's call it expression b dash. So b dash, at this point we can break this exponential of the sum into a product of exponentials. So an expectation over, let's say, phi dash, expectation over hi's of product of all the phi dash of exp minus gamma di minus alpha hi by d1 minus alpha. Is this clear? Why we can do it? We can do it because the interference, the fast fading is actually independent of where you are located. Remember, we talked about a user located at a location and a base station which is serving it. It gives an average received power and around it some fluctuation which is governed by this hi, which actually did not depend on how far or how near this base station is located. It's an independent random variable as compared to the distance of the base station. Therefore, we can separate these things. Yeah. Also, remember that each of these links are experiencing independent realizations of the fast fading, which means if this fast fading is called H1 and if this fast fading is called H2, H1 is independent of H2, right? And what we know is if we are taking an expectation with respect to x and y, it becomes expectation of x multiplied by expectation of y in case x and y are independent. So here we are dealing with a product of terms. So if we are only focusing on this part of the problem and not really focusing on for the moment this phi dash, which means what do we mean by focusing on that? Which means that for a given realization of the network, which means phi dash, if you are fixing phi dash, which means the distances of these interfering base stations are fixed. For that particular case, individual links which are experiencing these independent fast fadings is an expectation of this product of individual terms, right? Where each of these terms are independent of each other because hi's are independent of each other. Is this clear? Or is there some, did I lose someone or everything is okay? If you want, I can repeat at any time. Please feel free to stop me. Okay. What I'm saying is that for a given realization of the network, that means d1 and di's are fixed. Each of these terms which make up this product, each of these terms is independent of each other because hi's are independent of each other. So what we can say is, and since they are IID, which means not only they are independent, they are also identically distributed, individual expectations would behave in the same way, which means suppose I am taking an expectation with respect to x and y, right? What happens and if x and y are IID with mean mu? So this becomes expectation of x, which is mu, multiplied by expectation of y, which is also mu. It only is true because x and y are same, is drawn from the same distribution or identical distribution, right? So this becomes mu square, right? So in this case as well, since all hi's are independent of each other, we can evaluate only one of them, right? And just do a product, which means we can go to step D, which is an expectation with respect to the point process. So we have still not used any element of stochastic geometry here. It's still probability and random variables. Okay. So what we have is a product across all phi dash expectation with one of these HIs of e to the minus gamma di minus alpha hi by d1 minus alpha. If we do it for one of the hi, take it product of all the terms, that becomes the expectation of the product. Okay. Is step D clear? So if step D is also clear, then we are doing very well. We only have to find out what this guy would evaluate into. So what we are dealing with here is an expectation of e to the minus some s and the random variable x, an expectation with respect to x. So here the random variable is of course hi, right? So expectation with respect to hi of e to the power minus some constants, which is gamma di d1 etc. I mean, for the purpose of this inner evaluation, they are constants, right? So expectation with respect to this random variable of e to the minus s into that random variable. So this has an elegant form, or this is called, can someone recall what this is called?
Laplace transformation
Yes,
of
right. So can anyone again recall what is the Laplace transformation with respect to hi? Remember how hi's are distributed? Hi's are distributed with respect with like an exponential random variable with parameter or mean equal to 1. So each hi, right, that's what we used here as well, right? H1 was also exponentially distributed, that's why we have this CCDF. Here we are trying to find out the Laplace transform of a random variable x, where each x is exponentially distributed with parameter 1. Can someone recall what is this? What does this evaluate into? No? Come on, this is class 12 stuff. I think s by s plus 1 or s plus a. If you have done control systems, you must have come across these things. Okay, let's do it. Okay. So it's e to the minus s of x multiplied by pdf of x dx. X takes values from 0 to infinity. That's what we have to do. That's the expectation of e to the minus sx. Yes, no? So somebody, I think it was Vaibhav, who was saying what is the PDF of an exponential random variable with parameter 1. You remember it was 1 minus something like this. Is this correct? Just stop me if I am wrong. Okay, this is simply the PDF of this random variable x. Okay, so can you guys evaluate this? E to the minus sx dx, sorry, e to the minus sx minus e to the power minus 1 plus s x dx. Okay, I'll wait for 1 minute probably while you calculate this.
So 1 by s plus 1.
Sorry, yeah, this is 1 by
S into s plus 1.
s into s plus 1. Are you sure?
yes, sir.
Is everybody getting the same answer?
Minus of 1 by s into s plus 1.
Okay, so that's option number 1. Option number 2 of minus of 1 by s into s plus 1. What else are we getting? Yes, no? Okay, try this at home. Okay. So whatever you get, just write it here. So for the moment, let me go with 1 by s plus 1. Again, this is to be verified. Okay. So in case we have that result, what we can substitute here, or let's delete all these things. Yeah. So in this case, we have s equal to minus gamma di minus alpha by d1, or did we evaluate e to the power expectation of minus sx, or did we do expectation of sx? Does anyone remember what we did?
Minus sx, sir.
Minus sx. So
Minus
this
S.
is okay. So this is s, right? So we have an expectation with respect to phi dash. This is step E. Step E follows from the Laplace transformation, or LT, of HIs. This is a product of phi dash, and which is a function. The function is now called 1 by gamma di minus alpha by d1 minus alpha, gamma di minus alpha by d1 minus alpha plus 1. Okay. Verify this at home because I think there is something missing here still. So let me write it as star to be verified. Okay. So now what we have left with is a function. Again, remember this d1 for the moment is constant because we are still evaluating b dash, which is simply an expectation over phi dash, right? And for that particular evaluation, we will consider d1 to be constant because we will take an expectation with d1 at the end, while we have already multiplied with the other term. Okay. So d1 is constant. It is simply a product of point functions or functions evaluated at points which are defined by all the points of the point process except the first point. Can someone recall the result which we need to utilize here?
So
Yes.
it's exponential of minus lambda and yeah.
Okay, exponential of minus lambda integral 1 minus the function.
Yeah, one minus.
Yeah. So which is 1 by gamma. Okay. So what will it be? Can somebody tell me what should I write it here? Anyone? So I would like you to tell me rather than the other way around, because here it's an important point to consider. Okay. Anyone? What should we write as the expression? Do you remember the class where we discussed the probability generating function of a Poisson point process? Yes, no? Okay. So what we are dealing with, for the sake of repetition, expected values of product of functions evaluated at individual points, where individual points belong to some point process. For a Poisson point process, this becomes exponential of minus lambda integral 1 minus the function evaluated at a dummy point. Yes, that dummy point spans the entire domain. What is this result called? This is called the probability generating functional of a Poisson point process. So we are using the same thing in step F. Can someone tell me now what I should write?
So here D1 and DI would be taken as two different random variables.
So again, remember that D1 for the moment is constant, because D1 we will be taking an expectation with respect to it in the end here, right? So for the moment we are only discussing about Hi and phi dash. Hi we have taken care of. Phi dash consists of all the base stations which are not D1, right? So this is the thing, right? So D1 is for this evaluation a constant. So now can you tell me what it would be? You have the result written in front of you here, right?
Sir, it should be gamma di to the power minus alpha.
Okay, and so remember again, this is a very important point, and I think many people miss it in the first place, but I am trying to repeat it again and again. What we are doing is converting a function evaluated at individual points, taking a product of them and expectation of them, into an expression which evaluates the same function at a dummy point of x. So it is no longer di. Di hardly matters here. It is some r to the minus alpha,
Okay.
d1 minus alpha, gamma r minus alpha by d1 minus alpha. Remember, this r, it has nothing to do with d2 or d3 or d4 individually. It is a representative interfering base station, right, which is located at a certain distance r, would create this interference, and we would span the entire domain with this r. So this becomes dr. Is step F clear? Why it is not di or something else? So it is a dummy variable. So it is same to this expression, right? So you have a function evaluated at individual points xi. Instead of going to the individual points xi, you calculate it at some random point x, right? And span the entire domain with that x. Now my final question is this, and there I will stop. Okay. So step F, I'm deleting this, but I'll write it here. Step F follows from the PGFL of a Poisson point process. Now my question is this: what would be the domain of integration of R?
R is phi dash.
R is a distance of an interfering base station, right?
Yeah.
So
Then
from where to where it can go?
the distance of the nearest point to infinity.
Absolutely. So the domain of R of integration is not 0 to infinity, it is actually d1 to infinity. Is this clear? I think everybody, it should be straightforward, right? If you are a user and you are connected to the next base station and the rest of the base station which are acting as the interferers, and you want to not do it individually but think about it as a field of interferers, the interferers are necessarily located outside this circle which is given by d1. So when these individual x's have been converted into a fluidic interferer by taking it as a generic R, the domain of integration of this R goes from d1 to infinite. Okay, so whenever you calculate this expression, right, it will turn out to be a function of d1, not only because d1 is present here, but also d1 is a part of the integral limits. This will evaluate into, and from here we will continue in the next class. This will evaluate into some function, let's call it fb of d1, which then we will go back and substitute here as fb of d1, multiplied by another term which is a function of d1 and take an expectation with respect to d1. Overall, these terms might not evaluate into closed form solutions. So in the next class, not only we will be completing this derivation, but I will be demonstrating in MATLAB how we will be doing the numerical integration to evaluate this. Okay, we will also simulate a network and check how far our evaluation in these theoretical terms, which means we are actually evaluating a very complicated thing, which is the probability that a typical user gets an SINR greater than some gamma, right? So we have to check with simulations, which means we will generate realizations of this Poisson point process network and check whether our evaluation or the expression that we have derived until now, how closely it matches with the ground reality. Okay, for this development, until this step F, is everything comfortable? Is everyone comfortable with it? If yes, we will stop it today. I will stay here for a couple of more minutes in case you have any other questions, but please feel free to go to leave the class.
Sir, I wanted to ask, is grading going to be like relative or absolute?
So grading historically in the past 2 years has been relative, but in the first year what I had done, it's a mix of relative and absolute. So what does it mean? It means suppose somebody has got a 50 and somebody has got a 25, right? In case of absolute grading, this guy would probably fail if I set the limit as 30 or something. And this guy, suppose there are only two people, right? So 25 and 50, what I would do is scale this to 100. Accordingly, this scales to 50. And then I put boundaries, which is absolute boundaries. Is this clear? So you scale the highest one to 100. The remaining gets scaled accordingly. And then they fall into brackets, which go as A plus B, B minus or something like this. So it's a mix of relative and absolute, but really you can see it is relative. Is it clear?
Yes, sir. So basically, maximum can be like if someone gets 40 something, the maximum is 80 in that case.
So if somebody gets a 40, right, and this is the highest he has gotten, that's what you mean, right?
Yes, sir.
And somebody has gotten, let's say, 30. Right. So if these are the only two guys in the class, and if I have set boundaries like, okay, 80 to 90 becomes A, 90 to 100 becomes A plus, something like this, and 70 to 80 becomes B plus, something like this. So 40 becomes 100, 30 becomes 30 into 100 by 40, I guess.
75.
Yeah. So he will be here.
Okay.
Is this clear enough?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So it's relative because at the end I will be depending on your responses in the class and so on, I can give you a benefit of the doubt, which means I can make make this guy probably I will set these boundaries later on, right? So let's see how we proceed. But in the end, it's relative, which means that the main part of your grading is governed by the highest marks.
Sir?
Yeah.
Can you scroll up a bit?
Yeah.
Yeah, further up. About the exponential, the Laplace transform thing.
So I deleted that part, I guess. So it's this part which is to be verified.
Okay. I'll do it on my own and then.
Yeah. So what you have to do is basically take an expectation of e to the power. To keep it general, let's call it Sx, where x is a exponentially distributed random variable itself. So which means an integral of Sx, some small x, PDF of x dx, right? That's what you have to do between 0 and infinity. Okay. I think it evaluates as 1 by s plus 1. Okay. But okay, I will check as well. You guys also check as well, and then we come back to it. Okay. Anything else?
No, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you guys. I hope you are not lost in the discussions that we are having, because although we have moved on to a bit more complicated expressions, we will very quickly go into, I mean, even more. So this is just a first look into the things that we will be dealing with. We will be dealing with, let's say, several orders of higher complexity than this. But that's why it's important to go slowly for me and for you to be sure that you understand each and every step. Okay, thank you guys.
Sir, please post this.